Tonight, we go backward to the year 1912, a time when whispers could kill, when women with sight were burned before their second birth, and when fear dressed itself as righteousness. This story is not about survival. It is about retribution. It is the story of the Laveau twins and Papa Legba's wrath. They were Solange and Marinette, identical twins, except for the color of their eyes. They came into the world on the night of the 2 moons, 7 minutes apart. Tiny, quiet. But the candles in the village flickered when they wailed. Their mother, Anita Solange, was a voodoo servant of truth, a healer, a midwife, and a market woman who sold herbs. She was marked by the law. She knew her time was short and that her daughters were not ordinary. When they were just 7, Amina took them by the hand to the edge of the crossroads of the night rain, where the red clay bleeds even in drought. She stood at the corner of the veve drawn in salt and cornmeal. Her body was weak with ailment, even she could not cure, and waited. When the moon shifted and the wind rustled, the trees began to hum. She knelt. "Legba, I give them to you," she whispered. Papa Legba appeared in the rustle of leaves. Tall, gentle, eyes deep enough to drown in. He didn't speak, but his skin tapped once. 2 nights later, Anita's body walked forward, without her spirit, guided across the threshold, never to return. She had given her soul so the girls could live. Marinette, the elder twin, had silver eyes, stormy and wide. She could smell sickness before symptoms appeared. She would lean close to a person's chest, whisper a word, and bile would rise cleansing them. She brewed teas that made the mud lucid. Solange, the younger, had fingers that bloomed violets when she prayed. She could touch swollen bellies and tell if the baby had legs tangled or if a stillbirth was near. When a child refused to cry, her humming will wake their lungs. They lived on the edge of the forest, in a hut made of woven straw and sugarcane bark. Animals never attacked. They never attacked them. Animals come to them for salvation. And rain fell gently around their roof, never flooding it. The twins were poor, but they were worshipped in a way no priest could ever command. They had no gold, no gowns, no bread beyond what the forest gave them. Their roof was patched with moss, their floors swept with palm brooms, and their shoes were more hope than leather. Yet, to the Bayou, they were queens. Animals came to them, not by accident, but by instinct. A swallow with a torn wing would flutter to their windowsill and wait without panic. A fox, limping from a hunter's trap, once crawled beside their door and slept until Marinette rose to tend him. Frogs with blistered skin, turtles with cracked shells, dogs with sorrow in their bones. They came as if summoned, but the girls never summoned. They simply wore. Solange would whisper lullabies while she pulled thorns from poles. Marinette kissed snouts and eyelids as she stitched flesh with spider silk and salves brewed in moonlight. They never charged. They never asked. Their payment came in the way a deer bowed its head in thanks before vanishing into mist. The villagers saw this and called it a miracle. Some called it witchcraft, of course, but only when they were sober and ashamed of needing help. Because when their children were born too early, it was the twins who guided their breath. When a rush spread like wildfire through the village, it was Solange's poultice that cooled the fever. When a hunter returned after 7 days lost, he swore he followed a copper-skinned girl through the fog, only to find himself safe outside his own home. The twins never spoke of it, never claimed it. They laughed, loved. They loved their little patch of swamp and watched the world with those uncanny night sky eyes. One always knowing, the other always soft. And while the town whispered, the earth itself listened. And Papa Legba watched. Because they were more than herbalists, more than children. They were the last light left in a town that had long forgotten how to glow. And that, more than anything, is why the fire came, in form of a woman. She was beauty that had bled too long, dressed in perfume and rust. Clara Destinel was once the bloom of Judge's Hollow, a creature of spectacle and sin. She stood tall, with a swan-like neck and a back that never bent, even in age or shame. But time had not been kind to her. Her skin, once porcelain and soft like whipped butter, had begun to yellow, stretch thin in places, sagging in others. Age painted her like spilled wine, beautiful but spoiled. Her hair was a mass of red once, not copper, not ginger, but blood red, thick and theatrical. But by 1909, it was a tired rust. She kept it curled into perfect Victorian waves, always pinned, always perfumed. From a distance, she looked regal. Up close, you could see the cracks, the painted-on blush to mask fatigue, the lined lips drawn too thin from clenched secrets, the grey at the roots she swore wasn't there. Her eyes, though, her eyes were still fire, honey-colored with flecks of gold, sharp enough to pierce egos and tender enough to convince a man to leave his wife and forget his name. But they had grown tired, as if haunted by things even the town's preacher couldn't confess. She wasn't born cruel. Clara had once loved poetry and played the violin, but betrayal changed her. A man who promised her Paris, then sold her into a southern house as payment for gambling debts. After that, she vowed, never again would a man own me without paying the price. She became the town's provider of pleasure, confidant of politicians, poison of the preachers. And beneath all that power, Clara was still hungry. She lusted not just for flesh, though she did take men and women into her velvet chamber and leave them broken in delight, but for legacy, for youth, for immortality. It was rumored that she once paid a traveler from Haiti for a mirror she said would reflect your soul's truest edge. She smashed it when she saw a shriveled crone staring back at her when she looked inside. Clara also kept a jar of red hair beneath her bed, her own from younger years. She believed it held original magic, her fire, and every solstice she burned a strand in a silver bowl, whispering to spirits in a tongue she didn't understand. Her deepest secrets? She envied the Laveau twins, not just for their beauty, but because the spirits listened to them. The Loa loved them, and Clara had begged them for love for years and only ever had silence. She hated the twins because they reminded her of the simple pleasures of life she missed. They reminded her of the purity she gave up long ago for love that ended in lust and betrayal. Clara once approached the twins with the offer of riches and power. She tried to lure them into the life of pleasure-giving, the kind she led even though she sobbed into her pillows after every one of her satisfied patrons dragged themselves out of her chambers. The twins never relent, never showed a twinkle of lust for such lifestyle. They stayed pure, kind, and content. She never forgave them for that. So when the town called them witches, Clara didn't just agree. She led the witch hunt, with a smile on her lips and ashes already in her heart. Clara Deschanel had many lovers, mayors, traders, drifters, even preachers who spoke of purity, but bathed in her shits. But Etienne Rousse was different. He was a wealthy Frenchman, a merchant with a temper like broken glass. Etienne had once promised Clara a new life. He built her a hidden garden behind the velvet house and filled it with lilies from Corsia. Called her my everlasting love, and she believed him for a while. But Etienne had a wife, a quiet woman with small hands and a large belly. When Clara found out the wife was with child, she was livid, but silent. She knew better than to rage. Real revenge takes patience. The wife went into labor on a stormy night. The child came early, breech, cord around her neck, dying. Etienne panicked. The doctor would not make it in time. Someone whispered, "Call the twins." Solange and Marinette Laveau arrived, soaked in rain, and brought the baby girl back from death. But the child bore a cleft palate, and Etienne, proud, foolish, was ashamed. That night, Clara held him in her arms, wrapped in red silk, drunk on his guilt. Clara stroked his chest and whispered, "You know why she came out like that, don't you? Those swamp demons took her beauty, stole her luck. It is a trade. That's what witches do." Etienne shook his head weakly. "No. They saved her." Clara leaned closer, breath like honey and poison. They saved her body, not her feet. That is the trick they play. They give with one hand and steal with the other. Look at them. Skin like copper, eyes like midnight stars. That kind of beauty, it comes with a price. And your child paid it. And she let that settle. Then, like the spider she was, she planted the final seed. If they are allowed to keep walking freely, who knows what else they will take. Etienne, heartbroken, broken by ego, went to the preacher the next morning. Reverend Thorn, already simmering with his own hypocrisy, listened. Reverend Thorn arrived in 1884, tall, thin, pale as parchment, with eyes like smoked glass. He wore black gloves, even in summer, said it was to keep himself clean from the world's filth. In truth, it was to hide the marks on his hands, marks from rituals that had nothing to do with Christ. He spoke in tongues that made children cry. Women would faint. Men would drop coins into the offering plate even when their stomachs were empty. Thorn didn't preach to save. He preached to dominate. Every sermon is a weapon, every verse twisted. He told people their pain was God's punishment, that their suffering made him holy. The town believed he was chosen. They called him Father Thorn. Some even kissed his ring. But his wife, Mercy, knew better. She was a gentle woman, soft-spoken, skin bruised in places her shawls couldn't always cover. She was once a teacher from before Thorn called her home to serve. He beat her after every sermon, told her silence was worship, that her screams pleased the Lord. Once she tried to run, he broke her ankle with a hymnal, told the town she had fallen in the garden. She never walked without a limp again. She wasn't his wife, she was his sacrifice. Behind the pulpit, hidden behind a false panel, was a trapdoor. It led to a candlelit cellar. Stone walls ached with various symbols not found in the Bible. Bones lined the floor, feathers, teeth, nails in jars. There, Thorn confessed, not to God, but to something older, a whispering shadow with no name. He gave offerings, strips of skin, locks of Mercy's hair, tongues of birds, and once a stillborn child from a teenage girl who came to him for sanctuary. He called it divine purification. He forced town folk to gather every month for the purge service. Each person had to confess their sins publicly. Clara stood a few steps away from the Reverend and her lover. She watched as Etienne raged, as the town agreed. And when the preacher announced the twins would be purified by fire, Clara closed her eyes and smiled. She had won, not just vengeance, but a spectacle, a purge of the only two women who could make the town question her power. She watched them dragged, tied, and burned. She wore white that day. She said it was for purity, but in truth, she wore it for mockery. What she didn't anticipate was that the spirit don't forget. And Papa Legba, he was already listening, already watching. And Clara had just signed her curse with perfume and sin. It was just before dawn when the knock came. 3 hard fists against the hollow wood of the twins' cabin. Not a call for help this time, but a sentence. Solange heard it first. Marinette followed, clutching the small bundle of herbs she had prepared for old Mother Belrose, who had come to them the night before with trembling knees and a prayer for relief. They thought it was another villager. It wasn't. The door was kicked in. Reverend Thorn stood tall in the broken frame, hallowed by men holding torches, ropes, and fear sharpened into hatred. His eyes were glassy with conviction, and his voice cracked like thunder against the twins' silence. "By the grace of God," he shouted, "we purge the filth of witchcraft from this sacred town." The girls didn't fight. They only looked at each other, Solange's hand finding Marinette's, their fingers twining like veins reaching for the last bit of light. They were dragged barefoot through the swamp, their long nightgowns soaked in mud and mourning. Behind them, the forest held its breath. The village square was already waiting. The crowd was large. Every soul in Jesus Hollow had come. Mothers clutched their children's eyes. Fathers looked away, not because they believed the girls were evil, but because they were afraid. Afraid of him. Reverend Thorn stood upon a raised wooden platform, arms outstretched like a vulture in judgment. The twins were forced to their knees, then tied back to back against a crude wooden stick, hastily erected beside the town's only well. Their copper skin bruised and bloodied, their long black hair tangled with branches and dried tears. But they didn't cry. Not until the fire kissed their toes. The kindling caught quickly, fueled by the holy oil Reverend Thorn had sprinkled like salt on a curse. The flames licked upward, impatient, devouring the sisters' hems, their skin, their breaths. Solange screamed first, a cry not of fear, but of heartbreak. Not because she was dying, but because Marinette was her sister, her soul twin, her mirror. Marinette sobbed her sister's name until her throat blistered. She prayed, not to the Christian God, but to the one who had never abandoned them. Papa Legba, Papa Legba, we are your daughters. Their voices cracked, their lungs filled with smoke, but their eyes, those haunting eyes, those haunting, beautiful night sky eyes, never dimmed. And as the fire consumed flesh and memory, the wind changed. It died completely. Not a breeze, not a sound, just the roaring of fire and the silence of guilt. And then the smoke turned black. Not grey, not white, but thick, oily black, curling like fingers into the sky, twisted into symbols, ancient and forbidden. People backed away. The Reverend faltered. And in their final breath, Solange and Marinette whispered one last thing in unison. Papa, open the gate. The shudder passed through the earth. Dogs howled into the night. Horses balked. The church bell rang on its own, and the stake, the very wood upon which they burned, did not collapse. It stood, smoking, screaming. And above the square, for just one heartbeat, every single villager saw something they would never forget. A tall, dark figure at the edge of the road, standing at the crossroads. A cane, a wide-brimmed hat, and eyes glowing red through the smoke. Papa Legba had heard, and Jesus Hollow would never ever be the same again. The night the twins died, something ancient shifted. The villagers returned to their homes, their eyes haunted, their mouths shut tight with fear. No one spoke of what they saw, of the smoke that howled, the stick that refused to fall, or the shadow at the edge of the road. They told themselves it was grief, that maybe the twins were witches after all. But the sky didn't lie. It turned red. Not the red of sunsets of passion. This was blood red, a sky-soaked omen. And the gates opened. The crossroads moaned first, stones rattling, wits dying where they stood. Dogs barked and they didn't stop. Cats fled, and then came the footprints, burned into the dirt, one step at a time, walking into the village with purpose. Papa Legba was coming home. He did not come with thunder. He came with silence. And in that silence, every door unlocked. He walked the streets barefoot, smoke curling around him like loyal serpents. His skin struck the cobble, and the ground pulsed under it. With each step, oil lamps flickered and died. Glass cracked, milk soured, mirrors shattered in their frames. He paused at the herbalist's burnt cottage. Kneeling, he placed 2 black stones in the ash, one for Marinette and one for Solange. And then he stood and turned towards the church. Reverend Thorn was inside, still trembling from what he had seen. But his pride would not let him break. He was praying, shouting at the altar, demanding God show him a sign that he had done the righteous thing. That is when the crucifix bled. Thick, tar-like blood seeped from Christ's nailed palms and trickled down the wooden base. The candles in the church snuffed themselves out, and from behind the pulpit came a voice, smooth, rugged, deep in a canyon carved by centuries. You took what was mine. The Reverend turned, and there he was, Papa Legba. Heart low, eyes glowing ambers in a skull. He didn't speak with anger. He didn't shout. He didn't need to, because Legba is older than punishment itself. He is balance, and the Reverend had tipped the scale. Thorn stammered, raised his Bible, began to quote scripture. Papa Legba only smiled, and the pages turned to ashes in his hands. You burned my children, Legba whispered, so now you will carry them. He touched the Reverend's forehead with one long bony finger, and screaming filled the church. Thorn fell backward, convulsing, choking, his veins turning black. His eyes rolled into his head, and the voices of the twins echoed through his ears. Their cries, their prayers, their final breath burned into his mind. He would live with their pain forever. Clara Deschanel thought herself untouchable. That night, as the skies bled and the crossroads moaned, Clara lay in her bed, silk sheets tangled around her legs. She dreamed of a crossroads, of black dogs with human eyes, of twins with scorched hands reaching out for her. And then came Papa Legba. He did not touch her, he only looked and whispered, "You traded truth for power. Now you will wear both. She woke with her mouth sewn shut, not by thread, but by flesh. Her lips fused into a cursed smile, twisted into permanent silence. And Clara changed. Her beauty faded by the hour. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her eyes clouded. Her once glowing skin split and peeled. Villagers began to avoid her. Even her shadow refused to follow her footsteps. But worse than that, she saw them every day. The twins, smiling, innocent, standing in her mirror, walking behind her reflection, whispering what she could no longer say. Her screams came, but in silence. Her hands trembled when she tried to write what she had done, but the ink turned to blood on the page. Clara lived decades longer than any woman should, never dying, never aging past her agony, forced to remember each vile thing she had done. Papa Legba's curse was not death. It was memory. It was guilt. It was being unseen, except by the dead. She roams still, they say, in the abandoned mansion on the edge of the village, mouth sewn shut, clutching a cracked rattle, waiting for someone else to lie. But Papa wasn't finished. Outside, the wind howled like a mother mourning her lost children. Papa Legba walked through the town square, and where he passed, crops withered, water turned to bile, and the bells rang backwards. The town was cursed now. Each child born after that night would carry a piece of the fire. Every mirror would show a face not your own. Every Sunday, hymn would be sung off key. Every whisper in the dark would sound like Marinette and Solange. He marked the town, and then he vanished. Back to the crossroads, where he awaits, because justice for the twins is not over, not yet. The town was cursed for 7 years. Children born with no tongues, wells turned black, and every year on the day the twins burned, ash fell from the sky. Ash that tasted sweet, ash that sang. Mama Audrey, one of the few who dared speak of it, said, they weren't witches, they were bridges, and the town burned the gate Legba had opened, so he closed it on them. And these ashes, they still fall even now, every year. So if you find yourself walking the back roads of Jeje's Hollow, and you see 2 girls sitting quietly in white dresses by the old burned oak, don't speak, don't run, don't look too long. Just leave something sweet and whisper, I remember. Because Papa Legba does. And the ashes of the twins, they still walk. Not as spirits, but as reminders. Sleep well if the air doesn't taste like ash.